Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Stockbridge Board of Assessors meeting for November the 7th. We're starting a little bit late today because we have some, as they say, technical difficulties. And we are zooming off of Michael's laptop and not the equipment here in the meeting room. So with that said, Mike.
Good morning. Okay, number one, last week's minutes, basically what was carried over is everything that has to do with the tax rate, the public disclosure for our fiscal 23 certification.
The other one saying the same thing. Oh, yeah.
So number two, submission for final certification. Today is the last day on a technical level for this, for the DORs. Like what we have to do for the DOR to satisfy their public disclosure procedures for our valuations. It doesn't, again, I stressed this at our last meeting, it doesn't mean that the public can't inquire about their valuation. It's just what we have to do, the town of Stockbridge, to satisfy the certification standards for public disclosure. After today, what we will be doing tomorrow morning is submitting for final certification on our values. And that involves a two-part. We have to send a disclosure, basically a picture of the town's website to show that we did advertise that we had books available and evaluations available for viewing within the 2-week period. And we will be submitting a form that is called an LA-10, which basically says that the Board of Assessors and town of Stockbridge are not reporting any valuation changes that are above or below 10%. Once that is submitted, it hopefully will be a couple of days, maybe it'll be sooner than that. Since, you know, when the state gets our information, that we will have our final certification, which will basically make it a regular year in the life of the Board of Assessors in the assessor's office with the tax rate process, the tax billing process. So the next step after that, which brings us to number 3, is submission of our LA-4, which is a document that shows the valuations by class and the personal property by class, and the LA-13 new growth. And I did calculate the new growth for fiscal year 23, and we will be reporting in valuation $9,079,807, and that results in being able to raise an additional $85,169 in tax revenue. Basically, all that is that's added on to our total tax levy limit for fiscal year 23. This number is actually up by a little over 2 million over last year in valuation. Calculation for that is this spreadsheet right here documents every single change that we made construction wise. It also documents all the personal property changes, new second homes that were picked up, new businesses that are being listed, and any items that were new to businesses are being reported for fiscal year 23. So we're doing well on our new growth. It is consistent, and again, it's higher than last year's value.
So Michael, just to confirm, so new growth is not driven by a assessment going from 200 to 300.
No.
So that's all.
Oh, no,
So
not a change in value. It's basically going through your basic, all your building permit, which that's the first thing that we end up doing in our office. And once that's done, this procedure is pulling out all those records again, because those values have already changed since we looked at them with the certification changes that we've made. So it's basically going back to the beginning, looking at the record card, seeing the growth, and you're only picking up the actual growth at that time. It's never the change in the value from what we started with to the new value that we have. That's why they make you, this was never a requirement where you're listing the actual, every actual thing in the spreadsheet that was done. We used to submit a report like this, it's now a requirement. So that, once that is submitted, then we can schedule the tax classification hearing. And I know there's been a lot of talk about when that's going to be scheduled. And again, it can be scheduled as soon as the new growth is certified within a 48-hour period. There's no advertising, there's no legal notice on our end that we have to put in the paper. The DOR did away with that last year. So it's just basically following the town's procedures for public disclosure for a public hearing. And I've gotten a lot of questions as to when is that going to be. Again, I don't know until, we're hoping that this week the state will look at our final certification and our new growth number. And once we have that, then we can go forward with the tax classification hearing. As of last week, all of the department heads have been working on the tax rate. So we are pretty confident we have an idea, a pretty close idea of what that rate's going to be going forward. Which brings us to what could change that rate is the number. Well, actually, I'll go to number 4. We're working on the recap and the supporting documents. Basically, going into the classification hearing, we pretty much have to nail down what the tax rate is going to be, because there's no way of calculating the other options, which is the residential exemption and the small commercial exemption, without having a pretty solid number for the tax rate. And it's also good to have that nailed down, because the very next day after the tax classification, we're submitting for the tax rate. So we had our first meeting last week with Mike and the rest of the department heads, and we really got most of those forms in so we could have an idea of what the tax rate is going to be. Are you guys comfortable with me telling that rate, or would you rather wait? I mean, we're a matter of probably a few weeks, if not a week, away from scheduling the tax classification hearing.
Yeah, I think it's better if we wait.
Okay.
Personally,
But you can, I mean, again, it is very preliminary, but you can maybe.
It is with much confidence at this point going to be at least $1 decrease from 938, which was the reported, which will. And again, we think it's going to be even lower than that at the tail end, with a little changes here and there, maybe cent wise, but we're predicting it will be even lower than that at this point. But that's a big dip, again, caused by a few factors. Obviously the big one being the change in evaluations, but the other 2 factors being that our local receipts are strong. Even through COVID, the town has done very well, or at least okay. And the budget is consistent. There wasn't a huge increase in the town's overall budget with the raise and appropriate items. So that brings us to a decision that I think you guys should make today, because so we can really nail down the idea that we have for the tax rate is the number that we want to keep in the overlay. Now I've got the number from Cheryl for how much is still in there. It's roughly 65,000. And I know over the years, we'd like to keep it around 100,000. So we're hoping that we can use 50,000 this year and bring it a little over 100. And that would, keeping it there at this point would bring the tax rate down even lower.
So
The average right now, a 5-year average, which we have to report to the DOR, is 33,862. That's what we're using as a 5-year average.
So that's the average spending or overlay we're giving back.
Yes.
So is the 65 all accounts?
Yep.
That is all accounts.
Yeah, because even though I have my own spreadsheets going back to fiscal 14, which if you ever wanted to see them, each year, what we actually took out of overlay. But from 2017 with the Municipal Modernization Act, they put everything into one account. Although I'm pretty sure most communities are actually still keeping track of it year to year, which is still a good thing to do. So I'm going to verify that number, because my numbers have to match with Cheryl's numbers when we actually do the OL1 form, which is the 5-year average. That form will also need to show if we have any outstanding appellate tax board cases, of which we don't. Everything was settled last year. So we're going into fiscal year 23's overlay with no pending abatements of any kind, which is also great. And I don't know if there's ever been a year where I was putting 0 down for additional liability for the appellate tax board. So if so with the 65, well, it's actually 64,571.19, which remains in all the accounts. That includes the $20,000 that we used back at the beginning of the year to that went into with town vote overlay surplus that actually funded a few items from the fiscal year 23 certification and the update to our mapping, which so we're able to do the V8 change on our new version. And what we haven't done yet, so the money is still there, is getting the sketches on the computer, which I'm working on that right now with Vision and our mapping company. So typically you guys take a vote, and since we're going into setting the tax rate, and at least if we have that number nailed down, we'll be that much closer to knowing exactly what the rate is going to be.
So Michael, just go through the scenario. So if we did 50, we'd have approximately 115 in the account.
Right.
What happens if something crazy happens and there was a miscalculation and a math error or and we have to get back greater than 115?
We make it up on the recap sheet next year.
So I mean, it's not the end of the world.
It isn't the end of the world. We've never done an overlay makeup on the overlay the next year, but there's actually a line item on page 2 of the recap sheet where you absolutely can do that. So it's not detrimental. I know one of the meetings I went to a few weeks ago, they were talking about communities that have used the overlay as a budgeting item. And from what I know, there's 3 communities in Massachusetts that went a little overboard where they refused to fund the overlay at all, thinking, well, it's one account, so we'll have plenty of money, and they're now in a deficit. So I don't truly believe in using 0 for an overlay ever. And I'm surprised actually, because how they were able to submit their OL1 form with their 5-year average, if the very, 3 years later, all of a sudden they're in a deficit. That made no sense. So the idea of combining it into one account is great, but you still have to keep track of it year to year so you don't get into a situation like that.
So you mentioned we do have no liabilities for the past year, but we have some outstanding liabilities from years prior to that, or no?
Nope.
So we're
the levy has been completely settled going into fiscal year 23. So any abatements and exemptions that come in for fiscal year 23 will come directly out of the whatever amount you vote and what in the 65,000 that's left in there. Okay. So would you want to make a vote now for the 50,000?
With the valuations going up as much as they are, though, would you anticipate us needing more money?
I don't, because again, we did a preliminary projection using a very low tax rate, and Mike added on a few columns to the spreadsheet that's available online, and it showed easily over 1,000 properties out of the 1,900 that saw a decrease in their value after having an increase in their valuation. That's why we're confident to go down at this year as low as we could.
Okay, I guess my follow-up question would be if our average is 65.
no, average is 30 something.
Oh, 30, okay.
Yep. 30,
All right.
30, 33,862 is
Okay,
our 5
all
years.
right.
Because I'm a little nervous too, and I'm almost thinking that this, with the tax rate going down, if we're ever going to get a little bit more of a buffer, now is the time. There's just a lot of unknowns with
Yeah, it is.
this year. So that's why.
But we can always bump that up
So like,
next year. I think we'll be fine.
so what does $100,000 translate into the tax rate? Any idea? I mean, in other words, if we said instead of doing 50, we did 150 to bring us up just over 200.
Oh,
I mean, that would add like
No, I think that's extreme. I think it's important to go as low on the tax rate as we can with the values being as high. I think that will generate less abatements than actually adding more onto the tax rate. I mean, we've talked about this while we were doing the tax rate process, and we've made it clear through our other meetings that we needed to let the tax rate go as low as it possibly can
Well,
this year.
then let me ask you this, if we do 50, how much will that lower the 838 that you just mentioned?
Well,
Another
without
dollar.
mentioning it, what the tax rate's gonna be, I mean, we could be close to $8 for a tax rate. Which would be like $1.30 decrease. And again, that's gonna help people that saw big jumps. I mean, a few cents on some of these adjustments is gonna be big.
What do you think, Tim?
I suggest a compromise, so either, I think 50 we should do, but
So if you do a compromise, I think would be if 50 was on the table and something more was discussed, a compromise would be something greater than 50.
well, I thought it was on the table of perhaps doing nothing.
No.
That's not.
No.
Or what's your low point?
I think
50 is a low.
50. I think, and 50 is gonna give us over $100,000. That's a lot in an overlay account. Where your average is 34,000.
So-
Well, we used to have over 300. We
300,000.
used to have over
Right, but
300.
we also moved a lot of that money over.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, but we used to
Right.
have 300 and now we're
Right,
talking
but we
about
also
starting the year a
weren't-
little over 100.
Right, but we also weren't in a situation where valuations have ever gone up this high.
Right, which is a good indication that if we're gonna see extreme type of requests for abatements and for concerns,
Well,
this is the year it might happen. So
it
that's-
might happen on the high end, but again, we've never seen this many properties that could actually see a decrease. I feel we need to go as low as we can. That's my opinion. I mean, that's,
So the thing is, whenever we raise the overlay, we're taking the money out and that money. So if there's ever a time to take an overlay, you wouldn't want to increase your overlay when in increase in tax time because it would really hurt the taxpayer. So all I'm saying is that if
I think at this point with $150 million being added onto our valuations and our tax base, letting that tax rate go and using every tool we have, and that's a tool, is important at this point.
Can we do like 85? If we did 85, that'll bring us to 150. I mean,
Sure.
because again, if
You can use whatever amount you want. My
I
concern
think,
is, making sure the tax rate comes in. And we've done our part to make sure that we're providing the lowest possible rate that we can within reason of what have we given over the years where, and again, the overlay is something that you control, but at the same time, it's something that we need to be, it's an end result to where the tax rate should be. That is always the final. And as a matter of fact, when there's a rounding issue, the state takes the amount out of the overlay. So you could have 100,000 in there, ends up being 98,000 by the time the rounding is done.
So I would, the rate may be going down, but what everybody is seeing and talking about and worrying about is the valuation going up. And not everybody is making the connection. Well, valuation, but that's gonna be equalized by the lower rate.
Well, I think Mike's. been
Given
trying
the
to tell
public
them, though.
perception.
Yeah.
I've been
and
saying it
the
all along.
Controversy about this,
Mm.
I favor Mike's approach to go as low as we can. So I would suggest the 50.
I mean, it's not something that we did lightly. I mean, Mike and I have been talking a lot about this, and he, that spreadsheet that we came up with, which will probably be publicized right before the classification hearing. I mean, for valuations to go up and still see a decrease. And again, I can't at the moment pinpoint, is it, how many locals saw the decrease versus the second homeowners, that's a whole different thing. But that's a lot. There was a lot of value increase on the local side too. Depends on the style of property that you have and where you're located. And again, I don't think a huge jump from the 50 is going to make that much of a difference, but I know going forward, why wouldn't we go, as low as we could?
it just would be embarrassing if this account goes into a deficit. It's, as you mentioned, it's never been in a deficit before. And
Right,
that would be I would be embarrassed to think that
yep,
the overlay is in a deficit because we failed to financially plan.
Right.
And so I will do whatever we think is, but that is my.
I mean, I'm wishful thinking that as low as it goes on top of the higher values, that people will know that we did everything we could with the higher values, even though the tax rate is more of a component of, you know, the selectmen.
Spending.
Absolutely. I mean, they have the decision on the final tax rate, but this is a component to get to that number.
So I yield to the majority here.
Well, I guess. Mike has not steered us wrong yet, so I'll go with the 50.
Sure. Fine.
All those in favor?
I,
Aye. 50 it is.
Okay, Tom, I put down the tax exemption pilot program. I know you had a meeting.
yeah, so we had a meeting and we also had a reported to the Board of Selectmen on the 27th, a couple weeks ago. And essentially, the decision is that we're gonna move ahead with this committee. We're gonna try to complete the work prior to the annual town meeting next year. And the first step will be Peter, who's on this call right now, and I are gonna put the finishing touches on the questionnaire this week, I hope. And we'll distribute the questionnaire. And the questionnaire will largely be a vehicle to have interviews with the not-for-profits. So, and these will be collegial interviews, you know, we're not seeking to get into arguments with them, but just to explain what we're about, hear their point of view, hear the need, our arguments for a pilot committee. And then a pilot report that will be nothing, which will be guidelines. So it's not our business to negotiate any pilot agreements. That's the Board of Selectmen. Our mission is to complete a report, and it will be informed by our questionnaire and our interviews, and I suspect a public hearing or two, and then we will be done. And Peter and I are going to co-chair this effort. Peter, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you've put it exactly well.
Okay.
All right.
So at this point, unless, oh yeah, we need, any questions from our Zoom audience?
It's not a question, but as a taxpayer, I want to appreciate your going low.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, we can only go what the spending is based on. So.
I
so
understand,
our
perfectly
work is done.
understood,
Yeah, our work is done. We can't control any of the tax, you know.
perfectly understood. You guys are doing a remarkable job.
Thank you.
Thank you. So at this point, I would entertain a motion to close the public portion of our meeting and then go into executive session per Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A7, to discuss and review motor vehicle abatements. And so I would entertain a motion to do that.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And that covers both votes. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.